I lent my son $500,000 on a Tuesday afternoon, and 2 days later, I was sitting on a metal chair at the police station, testifying against him. Don't look at me like that. You don't know what it's like to have to choose between love and suspicion, between saving your child or saving yourself. You don't raise a kid for that. You raise them to see them happy, not to see them cornered between lawyers, lies, and shame. My name is Mary Ellen. 68 years old, retired from the central bank, with bones of steel and an even harder head. I've read more contracts than love letters, and believe me, papers lie too. They just do it with a notarized signature. Since I was widowed, my life was like a Swiss watch. Coffee at 8, short walk, TV on mute, accounts balanced to the last cent. Nothing happened, and I didn't need anything to. Until my son showed up at the door with a bouquet of cheap flowers and a catalog smile, the kind that smells like trouble. "Mom, I need you to trust me," was the first thing he said. And right then I knew I was about to get into something nasty, because Michael only says, "Trust me," when he's already got the noose around his neck. "What have you done now?" I asked, pouring him coffee before I even heard the answer. He sat down carefully, as if the air around him were heavy. He opened a gray folder with a logo that looked like it came out of some office in Miami, SFD Global Investments Limited. "It's my company, Mom. Financial technology. We're about to close an investment round, but I need immediate liquidity. $500,000. $500,000? I repeated without raising my voice. "You're selling yourself cheap, son. I thought you'd at least come for your mother's soul." Michael let out a nervous laugh. He told me it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, that he'd sign everything, that there were guarantees, that even his partner's lawyer could explain every detail. That's when I raised an eyebrow. "Partner?" I asked. "Sophie, you already know her. The influencer girlfriend. Business partner is business partner, Mom. Let's not mix things up." I didn't answer. I looked at the folder, at my son's trembling hands, and that glint in his eyes I knew all too well. The look of someone about to do something crazy and dress it up as success. I told him to email me the papers, that I wanted to read them calmly. And when he closed the door, I stayed there alone, with the smell of wilting flowers and a feeling in my chest that was like fear, but more bitter. That night I opened my email. Subject: Loan documents. Thank you, Mom. I downloaded the file, printed it with my old bank printer, and spread it out on the living room table. My eyes burned, but my professional habit was still intact. Small print, annexes, signatures, numbers. And there, on the third page, I saw it. Legal owner, Sophie Dawson. Not Michael, not my son. The company, his big dream, wasn't his. It was his girlfriend's. I felt a heat rise up my neck. I called Michael. He didn't answer. I wrote to him. Why does Sophie appear on the papers? Silence. I barely slept that night. I got up 3 times to check the document, as if it might change on its own. It didn't. Only at dawn did I dare admit it. Something didn't add up. And before I go on, I want to pause. Before continuing with my story, I'm really curious to know where in the world and at what time you're joining me today. I'd love to read you in the comments. I like to picture who's on the other side listening to this. Whether you also have stubborn children, whether you too have ever felt that love and suspicion can fit inside the same heart. When I got up from the chair, I'd already decided. I was going to go over those papers like in my best days. I took out the blue binder where I keep my accounts, sharpened a pencil, put on my glasses, and swore that, if someone was lying to me, whoever it was, I was going to find out. What I didn't imagine was that, by doing so, I'd end up digging up secrets much older than that contract. Because that Tuesday wasn't the day my son asked me for money. It was the day I started to understand who he really was. I spent the whole next morning with the papers spread on the table, light coming in through the window and the smell of cold coffee, which I didn't even notice anymore. I read and underlined every clause with a pencil, as if that could stop the feeling of betrayal rising in my stomach. With each line I read, it became clearer that this wasn't a simple loan between mother and son. It was a trap, A document put together so the money would change hands and never come back. What I didn't know was whether Michael knew it, and that doubt was what hurt the most. When I got to the paragraph about previous liabilities, I had to look away from the paper. That expression doesn't show up in a clean contract. Previous liabilities is what we accountants say when we don't want to use the word debt. And nobody had said a word to me about any debt. I stayed quiet, listening to the living room clock ticking, and thought that if I didn't do something soon, I wasn't just going to lose the money, I was going to lose what was left of my trust in my son. Then it occurred to me to call George, my old colleague from the bank, the only man I could still discuss numbers with without him talking to me like I'm some senile old woman. I'd known him for 40 years, and even though he walks with a cane now and has the temper of a demon, his mind is still sharper than a razor. "Bring churros," I told him on the phone. "And your good glasses. We've got fraud for breakfast." He arrived an hour later, grumbling, with a greasy paper bag. He sat down, looked at the folder, and muttered, "SFD Global Investments. Sounds like a Miami company run. From someone's garage." "Exactly. How much did he ask you for?" "500,000. "Ah, just that," he replied with a crooked smile. "At this rate, you'll have to invite me to your account's funeral." We spent the whole morning going through the documents, page by page, while I told him what Michael had said to me. George made notes, mumbled under his breath, and every now and then looked at me with that mix of pity and respect men get when a woman stays firm, even though something inside her is breaking. "Look at this," he said after a while, pointing to a paragraph on page 3. "If you sign here, the money doesn't go straight to the company. It goes to a bridge account to cover previous liabilities." I saw that. "Then you know what it means. Debts. Big debts, Mary Ellen. And if there are debts, there's interest. And if there's interest, there's someone else waiting to get paid." I stayed quiet. I knew it instantly. Michael was mixed up with someone. And not with a bank, because banks don't lend money to guys like him anymore. With someone who doesn't leave receipts or send formal notices. George got up and went to the window. He stared out at the street for a few seconds in silence, as if he too had something to remember. "You know what pisses me off about all this," he said at last. "That we saw this kind of thing our whole lives, and we always thought it wouldn't happen to us. Because we were the ones signing the papers," I answered. "And now we're the ones who'd sign without reading." I laughed, but the laugh broke halfway. There was something in what he said that pricked my pride. I'd spent my entire life spotting other people's mistakes, and now I had to admit my son had slipped one past me without me noticing. George left before noon, leaving me a napkin full of notes. "Check addresses. Look up Sophie's record. See if the company is registered with the tax office." It looked like a manual for getting my dignity back. When I closed the door, the silence weighed more than the money. I wandered through the house, running my hand over the furniture, looking for something that might give it all meaning. And then, on the bookshelf, I saw the blue file where I kept my old bank cases. I opened it. There were client folders, reports, copies of contracts I should never have kept. In one of them, with the name of a former director, was the case that still keeps me up at night, the 2005 retirees fraud. I remembered it like it was yesterday. That director, elegant with his Swiss watch and fake smile, had convinced several elderly clients to invest their savings in a non-existent fund. When I found out, they told me to shut my mouth if I wanted to keep my job, and I did. I shut it. Since then, every time someone talked to me about opportunities, I felt the same metallic taste on my tongue. That day, I knew that if I ever saw something like that again, I wasn't going to stay quiet. I sat with the folder on my lap, looking at the dates and stamps, and thought that maybe this thing with Michael wasn't just a family story. Maybe there was more. Maybe Sophie wasn't just the pretty girlfriend from those motivational videos. Maybe there were people behind her, like that bank director back then, hiding among stamps and shell accounts. The phone rang. It was Michael. "Mom," he said with a tired voice, "I don't want you to worry." "Why would I be worried?" I asked, gripping the receiver. "Sophie told me you texted her." Everything's fine. There was just a mistake in the paperwork. She appears as the owner because she has better tax conditions. But it's my company, you know that. Of course, I said, not believing him. It's always about conditions, isn't it? There was a short but heavy silence. Don't start, Mom, trust me. You already asked me that yesterday. I'm still thinking about it. He hung up without saying goodbye. I stood there for a moment with the phone in my hand, listening to the empty tone, and I knew that conversation wasn't the end, but the beginning of something much bigger. The rest of the day I spent checking my email, looking for traces, names, anything that might tell me who this Sophie Dawson was, beyond Instagram filters. I found a LinkedIn profile with a perfect smile and titles puffed up like balloons. CEO, visionary, international expansion leader. Language that in the real world usually translates to, I have no idea, but I dress well. By midnight, my head was burning, and I had the clear feeling that everything was about to blow up. I poured myself a whiskey I keep for truly bad days and toasted alone in the kitchen. To you, Michael, I murmured. I hope I'm wrong. Outside, the street was silent. On the computer screen, the documents were still open, and Sophie's name glowed like a warning. I didn't know that in less than 24 hours I'd be standing in front of her, smiling out of politeness while calculating the exact distance between the lie and the disaster. I met her on a Thursday afternoon, in a coffee shop where everything seemed designed to make people believe they were successful. Cream-colored walls, soft lights, coffee served in cardboard cups with names badly written on them, and background music that sounded like cheap Triumph. Sophie was 10 minutes late, though she texted me, "On my way, Mary Ellen. Crazy day with investors. I owe you a drink." She showed up flawless, tall, perfectly made up, with that kind of confidence that only comes from knowing you're being watched. She leaned in, gave me an air kiss, and called me mother-in-law, with a smile so white it reminded me of the dentist's shelves. "Sorry I'm late, I haven't stopped all day," she said while pulling out her phone and starting to talk to the camera. "Guys, here, with my mother-in-law, one of the most inspiring women I know." I had to bite my tongue not to spit out my coffee. I wasn't part of her show, and much less her set decoration. She sat down, ordered a matcha with oat milk, I didn't even know that existed, and started talking about her company like someone reciting a memorized poem. "We're revolutionizing the way people invest their money, Mary Ellen. We're the future of accessible finance. We want everyone to be able to win." I watched her, slowly, without interrupting. Her gestures were precise, rehearsed, arms moving, gaze steady. But deep down in her eyes there was something familiar, that nervous glint of someone afraid of being found out. When she paused to check her notifications, I took my chance. "Sophie, I've got a simple question," I said. "If the company is Michael's, why do the documents list you as the sole owner?" She leaned forward, like she'd just heard an awkward question in an exam. "That's just a legal technicality, Mary Ellen. Michael and I are partners, but sometimes startups need a single signature to make things easier. Everything is properly registered." "Ah, of course, startups," I repeated, tasting the word like something gone off. That's what I figured. For a few seconds, the only sounds were the coffee machine and someone asking for a croissant in the background. Sophie smiled, but her smile was no longer entirely steady. I pulled out my little notebook, a habit I never lost from the bank, and started jotting things down as we spoke. She pretended not to look, but she did. "And how long have you had the company?" "Almost a year." "Any employees?" "Well, we're currently expanding." "Ah, expanding." I looked up and stared her right in the eye. "And profits?" Her face tightened just a little. "Look, Mary Ellen, you don't need to worry. Michael told me about your character. He said you're a very strong, very strict woman." "No, darling," I cut in. "Michael fell short with that description. I'm suspicious. And when something smells bad, I dig until I find where the smell is coming from." She laughed, nervous, and turned the phone toward herself to record another story. Family meetings, all work, all love. I forced a smile, because theater works better when you don't show your cards too early. We finished our coffees without any more drama. When we said goodbye, she touched my arm and said, "Michael does everything for you. You know that, right? He does everything for something, Sophie." Not the same thing. On my way home, the afternoon turned gray and damp, and I felt old, not in years, but in tiredness. That woman represented something new I didn't quite understand. A polished, optimistic kind of lie wrapped in hashtags. I'd worked with thieves in ties. She did it with Instagram filters. But the mechanism was the same. When I got to my building, I ran into Karen, my neighbor on the 4th floor, in her floral robe and half-burned cigarette. "I saw you with that doll in the beige coat," she said without greeting. "Your boy's girlfriend, right?" "That's the one. She looks like she'd sell you your soul and then return it used." "Well, I hope she doesn't sell me anything. I already have enough moral debt." "Bah. Kids always come out expensive." She puffed smoke and added, "But daughters-in-law, those are the ones that ruin your pension." I laughed without much feeling. I walked up the stairs, thinking how much truth might be hiding in the comments of a woman who lives with 3 cats and 2 ex-husbands on her record. I sat in the kitchen, opened the laptop, and looked up Sophie again, but deeper this time. What I found didn't please me. Addresses changed every 6 months, a previous company dissolved without explanation, and a partner who appeared and disappeared from records. There was a pattern. Every year, a new name, a new business, the same kind of advertising. For the first time, I felt a real chill, not of suspicion, but of fear. Because this wasn't just my son's reckless adventure anymore. It was a network. And if there was a network, Michael was the small fish. I thought of calling him, but held back. I didn't want to show my cards too soon. I needed to understand first which side he was on, the naive or the complicit. I stepped out onto the balcony, looked at the neighborhood lights, and caught myself picturing my son as a child, with scraped knees and an easy smile. He was sweet, affectionate, stubborn. I never knew when his compass went crooked. Maybe the day he understood that money opens doors that education doesn't, or the day he saw me crying quietly over the debts his father left behind. When night fully fell, I got a message. "Mary Ellen, we need to talk, alone. It's important." It was Sophie. I stared at the screen, frozen. I didn't know if it was a threat or an opportunity, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something like excitement. Because if I wanted to really understand what was happening, I was going to have to sit in front of that girl again, and this time, not as a confused mother-in-law, but as the woman who spent 30 years catching out cheaters. The difference being that now, the cheater slept under my surname. I barely slept that night. Sophie's message stayed on the phone screen, glowing in the dark of my bedroom like a firefly that wouldn't go out. I got up several times, walked barefoot around the house, opened the fridge without being hungry, poured some water, left the glass on the counter, and ended up at the window, watching the distant city lights, trying to imagine what that woman could want from me and why alone. Whether it was to convince me to invest or to warn me about something worse. When morning came, I'd already decided, before I saw her, I was going to talk to Michael. I sent him a short text, "Come for lunch, and don't give me excuses." He didn't reply, but at noon I heard him arrive. He walked in with his usual energy, faking normality, with that exaggerated air of a son who wants to make you forget there's a problem. He'd brought a bottle of wine, which was unusual, because Michael never brought wine unless he wanted to sugarcoat a conversation. "I made your favorite," I told him as I put the dish on the table. "Meatballs in sauce. Mom, you smell like nostalgia," he joked. "Either that, or you're trying to bribe me. Nostalgia can't be bought, Michael, but trust, it seems, can." He laughed, nervous, and sat down. We started eating in silence. I watched him out of the corner of my eye, trying to recognize the boy I'd raised in his face, but all I saw were more and more shadows. He had dark circles, a twitch in his jaw, a skittish gaze. When I finally spoke, I did it, calmly, like someone laying a card on the table without needing to explain the game. "I had coffee with Sophie yesterday," I said. Michael froze, fork halfway to his mouth. What? We had a coffee. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't have to. I didn't know I needed permission to talk to your girlfriend. I saw him swallow. He tried to get back his carefree tone, but the discomfort was obvious. Mom, she's just trying to help you understand the project. That's what she says. But I understand more than you think. I took the folder with the document copies and placed it on the table. Michael went pale, just barely. I want you to explain this to me. Don't start again. No, Michael. This time I'm not letting it slide. In these documents, the legal owner of the company is Sophie, not you. It's a technical issue, Mom, I already explained. And the previous liabilities? I asked. What debts am I paying without knowing it? His expression hardened. He looked away. They're not debts. They're investments that didn't go well. That's called debts, Michael. It's temporary. It'll all be recovered. His voice rose as mine dropped. He spoke quickly. I spoke with a calm that unsettled him. Do you know what hurts me most? I said at last. Not the money. It's you treating me like I'm stupid. Michael stood up abruptly, pushing the chair back. It's always the same. You can't stop controlling everything. Always suspicious. Always thinking you know better than everyone. Because most of the time I do, I answered without raising my voice. We ended up facing each other, the table between us, the plate of meatballs like a border. He looked at me with tired, wet eyes. I'm trying to do something big, Mom, he said. I don't want to be just some guy. I want you to be proud of me. And you think I'm going to be proud, watching you lie straight to my face? There was a silence that lasted centuries. He took a deep breath, ran a hand through his hair, and turned his back to me. I can't talk about this, he muttered. Then don't come ask me for anything else. He left the kitchen without looking back. I heard the elevator door slam and the silence a decision leaves behind when it walks out. I stayed alone, the table set, food smell cooling in the air. The clock read 3:15, the exact time I realized my son was no longer the man I thought I knew. My phone vibrated again. It was Sophie. A short message. Mary Ellen, don't trust anyone, not even Michael. We have to meet today. I stared at the screen. It was a message that could mean everything or nothing, a warning or a threat. I closed my eyes for a second, trying to listen to my own instinct. All I could hear was the echo of Michael's slammed door and my own quick breathing. I poured myself fresh coffee and sat in the protective chair where he'd been just minutes before. I looked at his fingerprints on the glass, the little sauce stains on the tablecloth, as if those marks were evidence of an invisible crime. I didn't know what hurt more, thinking Michael was involved in something dangerous, or realizing Sophie might be using me for something even worse. The sun fell across the table, and I became aware that time had kept moving while I tried to decipher the moves of two people who claimed to love me. At the bank, I could read a whole account just by seeing the numbers. But here, in my own family, the signs were different. Looks, blanks, twisted gestures, silences. I picked up the phone, took a deep breath, and typed a reply. All right, Sophie, tell me where and when. When I sent it, I felt something I didn't expect, a flicker of excitement, the same I used to feel back at the bank when I came across a tough case and knew I was about to uncover something big. That thrill of hunting down a truth in the shadows. Only this time, the truth shared my blood and wore an expensive influencer perfume. She didn't pick a cafe or an office. She picked the underground parking lot of a shopping center. That already told me plenty. Sophie was waiting in her car, a shiny white sedan that smelled of perfume and anxiety. I got in without greeting her, and she drove off without looking at me, her hands tight on the steering wheel, perfectly manicured nails trembling slightly. We drove in silence for several minutes, air thick, until she parked in a corner away from the cameras. Thank you for coming, Mary Ellen, she said at last, lowering her voice. I need to talk to someone who isn't contaminated. And why me? I asked. Because you don't owe me anything. And she hesitated. I don't owe you anything yet either. I turned to look at her. She was wearing sunglasses even though we were underground, which already meant that the tears or the fear didn't. He want to show themselves. Michael is in something he doesn't understand, she whispered. He thinks he has a company, but it's the company that has him. What are you talking about? About dangerous people, Mary Ellen. Investors who aren't what they say they are. If we don't follow the rules, it's all over. I listened carefully but didn't move a muscle. That calm you learn in banking. Let the other person talk until their nerves betray the truth. Sophie went on, words tumbling out. I really thought it was a clean business. Until they started asking me to move undeclared money, to open accounts with fake names, to register companies that don't exist. I stayed silent for a few seconds. And Michael, does he know all this? She hesitated, lowered her sunglasses. He knows just enough to think he can fix it. But he doesn't understand that if he tries to get out now, they'll destroy him. I didn't know whether to believe her. She was good at acting, I'll give her that. She had that kind of tears that fall at exactly the right moment, not before, not after. But there was something in her voice, a broken tone you don't learn in any manipulation course. What exactly do you want me to do? I asked. Just don't sign anything else. Don't transfer a single dollar without telling me. And don't tell Michael we talked. Oh, of course, I said ironically. You're asking me to lie better than you. Sophie looked at me with a strange sadness. Don't believe me, Mary Ellen, but be careful. There are things a lawyer can't fix. I got out of the car feeling like I'd walked on broken glass. The cold parking lot air hit my face like a bucket of ice water. I walked towards the exit, thinking about what I'd just heard. If it was true, Michael was in up to his neck. If it was a lie, it was a brilliant move to isolate me from him. Either way, I'd crossed a line. On the street, the traffic roared, and I felt an urgent need to do something, not to sit still while everyone played with me. So I did what any sensible woman would do. I went to the police. I walked into the local station with a firm step, as if I still carried a briefcase under my arm. At the front desk, a young officer looked at me with that annoyed expression people get when an older person interrupts their shift. How can I help you, ma'am? I want to report a possible scam, I said. What's the amount of the damage? $500,000. His face changed. He asked me to wait. After a while, a middle-aged man appeared, in a badly pressed suit, tired but honest eyes. Officer Miller, he introduced himself. Come with me, please. We went into a small office with nicotine-colored walls and the smell of old paper. I told him everything, from the loan to my conversation with Sophie. Miller took notes without interrupting. When I finished, he dropped the pen and looked at me. Look, Mrs. Mary Ellen. Look, Mrs. Mary Ellen, he said in his standard tone. This sounds serious, but without clear evidence, there's not much we can do. I have the documents, and I have my instinct, I replied. Instinct isn't evidence, unfortunately. It wasn't evidence at the bank either, but it was enough for me to save more than one client. He smiled, incredulous. Let me guess, you worked in banking? 32 years. And if I'd done the right thing when I should have, you wouldn't be listening to this story today. I saw him raise his head, suddenly more interested. What do you mean? I mean that many years ago, I saw a group of directors scamming retirees with fake products, and I kept my mouth shut. I kept it shut to keep my job. Miller went quiet for a few seconds. Where did you work? Central Bank, Brixton branch. My mother lost her savings there, he said, almost in a whisper. The coincidence hit me like a slap. Then now you understand why I'm here. I'm not looking the other way again. Miller stared at the papers, serious. Then he nodded. We can open an investigation, but we need you to cooperate. If you agree to keep playing along, we can trace the money and catch whoever's behind this. You want me to act as bait? I asked. I prefer to think of you as the one holding the hook. I left the station with a strange weight in my chest. For the first time in many years, I felt I had something to lose and something to gain at the same time. The sun was already setting, and the reflection in the glass gave me back an image I hadn't recognized in a while. A woman ready to fight, not just for money, but for dignity. When I got home, the answering machine was blinking. A message from Michael. "Mom, I don't know what Sophie told you, but don't believe her. Everything's fine. We'll talk tomorrow." I listened to it twice, without deleting it. Then I switched off the living room lights and sat in the dark, thinking about what was coming. It wasn't fear I felt, it was a cold clarity. The sense that I was finally seeing the whole board, even if the pieces still moved on their own. Outside, the city kept its rhythm. Inside, I'd already decided I wasn't letting anybody else move my money or my story without my permission. And though I didn't know it yet, that was the exact moment I stopped being a mother and became a witness. The next day, I woke up with a dry throat and a head full of numbers. Not money numbers, possibility numbers. If Miller was right, the best thing was to keep playing along, pretend I trusted them, let them believe I was the same gullible widow they'd tried to fool. It was a strange feeling, using my old tools again. Observation, calculation, a cold face. I didn't feel weak. I felt useful, something I hadn't felt in years. Miller called me early. He wanted to introduce me to a young lawyer who worked with them on financial fraud cases. I arrived at the station with the blue binder under my arm like it was a relic, and he took me to an office that smelled of reheated coffee. She was there, sitting in front of a mountain of files, hair tied back, sharp eyes, and a kind smile. "Laura Miller," she said, holding out her hand. "Yes, I'm his daughter. He told me about you." "I hope not in too much detail," I replied. "Just enough to know you've got more brains than half this department put together," she said, and I liked her immediately. Laura spread a new document out on the table. It was almost identical to the contract Michael had sent me, but with subtle changes. "We're going to do something simple," she explained. "You'll sign this contract with them, but we'll draft it so we can track the money. Every movement will be recorded without them knowing. As soon as they try to transfer it to a shell account, we'll be authorized to block it." "A legal trap," I said. "A fair trap," she corrected, and I liked that phrase. I left the station clutching the new folder to my chest. The plan scared me, but it also made me feel a kind of euphoria. I'd gone from victim to key piece in an investigation, and that woke up something in me, a reflection of the woman I'd been before retirement. I called Michael that same afternoon. "I've been thinking about what you said," I told him, before he could speak. "If you're going to do this, let's do it properly. I want to sign the loan." "Really?" His voice lit up. "Mom, you don't know how much this means." "Oh, I know. That's why I want you to come with Sophie. I want all three of us here." They came the next day, with practiced smiles and Sunday clothes. Sophie wore a new, sweeter, more invasive perfume, like she needed to erase any trace of nerves. Michael hugged me, and I pretended to believe that hug. "I've prepared everything," I said, showing them the documents. "All that's missing is your signature and mine." "You're amazing, Mom," he said, and I heard an old tenderness in his voice that made me hesitate for half a second. We sat in the dining room. Sophie talked too much, stuffing the silence with empty words. Trust, family, future. I nodded, took notes, pretended not to understand some terms. Like a good mother who just wants to help. In reality, every word they said was being recorded. There was a hidden mic in the ceiling lamp, connected to Miller's texts. Everything was happening in real time. "Just one thing," I said at the end. "The money will go through my bank first. That way I feel calm and have proof of the transfer." Sophie smiled, strained. "No problem, Mary Ellen, whatever you prefer." Michael said nothing, but his relief was obvious. He had no idea I was tightening a rope around his neck. We signed the documents. I offered them coffee. We chatted a bit about trivialities, and they left happy, convinced the old lady had given in. When the door closed, I stood in the hallway, listening to the echo of their steps. On the table, the pen still held my fresh fingerprint. I didn't feel guilty, I felt powerful, and that scared me a little. That night, Miller called to confirm the contract was in motion. "You did perfect, ma'am," he said. "We've got the trace ready. As soon as they move the money, an alert will go off. And then? Then we'll see how far the network goes." I hung up and stared into the dark living room, lit only by the computer screen with Michael's email still open. Deep down, I knew nothing would be simple. It's not just about catching scammers. It's about deciding how much you're willing to lose in the process. George stopped by the next day, looking worried. I told him the basics, just enough. He muttered something about his blood pressure and his age, sat to have a coffee, and looked at me with a mix of fear and pride. "I don't like you getting mixed up in this, Mary Ellen. I didn't like raising a liar, and I did it anyway. Just promise me you won't do this alone. Relax, I'm not alone. I've got the police, a young lawyer, and my common sense. Those three scare people more than a gun." He laughed, but there was tiredness in his eyes. He told me about some medical tests he had coming up, about a pain he'd been ignoring for weeks. I promised him I'd go with him to the doctor when all this was over. We didn't know then that "when all this is over" can mean anything. That evening, I sat in the same chair where Michael and Sophie had been. On the table were the empty cups and a copy of the contract. I thought about how quickly things can turn, how an act of love can become a police investigation, how life forces you into roles you never rehearsed for. That night there were no toasts or promises. Just a thick silence and one certainty. The game had truly begun, and this time I wasn't the pawn. I was the player. The day I made the transfer dawned overcast, with that gray that seems to suspend the air. I put on my long coat and went early to the bank, envelope in my handbag and a deceptive calm in my step. I hadn't set foot in there in years, and walking in was like going back to a previous life when I still believed I could understand the world through numbers. The new employees looked at me with that mix of courtesy and pity reserved for older people who still think they know what they're doing. At the counter, I asked to see the manager. When they asked why, I told them it was for an important transfer. I didn't lie. I didn't say more or less than necessary. The manager turned out to be a young man with perfectly slicked back hair and one of those watches that scream "success" every time you turn your wrist. He saw me in his office, smiling like he was selling confidence from a catalog. I handed him the papers and told him I needed the transfer done first thing, but that I wanted to review the destination details before signing. He leaned toward the screen and started typing. Everything looked normal, too normal, like the trap was hiding in the invisible. When he finished, he looked up and asked if I wanted to confirm the amount. "Exactly $500,000, I said without blinking. He nodded, almost impressed. "Are you sure?" he asked with a kind smile. "The only thing I'm sure of is that if I die tomorrow, this will be the last thing I sign," I replied, and his smile froze for a second. I signed, and I felt the weight of the pen like a key turning in an invisible lock. As I walked out, I took a deep breath. The air smelled of smoke and toast from nearby cafes, and I thought that if everything went wrong, at least my goodbye smell would be a good one. "Mid-afternoon," Miller called. "It's all in progress," he said. "We're tracking it in real time. As soon as they move the money to another account, we'll know. And if they do it right away, they won't. There's always a gap. Thieves trust time more than luck." I hung up, and the certainty that the money was no longer mine left me empty. It wasn't just the sum. It was what it represented. All the years of effort, days of saving, control, prudence. It was the part of me that had believed order meant something. At dusk, the doorbell rang. It was Karen, the neighbor. She showed up wearing a flour-stained apron and holding a half-empty bottle of wine. "Don't judge me," she said before I could speak. "I baked bread out of nerves, and it came out like a brick. I need to vent to someone." I let her in. She sat in the kitchen, lit a cigarette and told me, without me asking, that her daughter hadn't called for months. "All over a damn inheritance," she said, blowing smoke at the ceiling. "When I die, she'll cry. For me, but not as much as for the money she didn't get." I listened in silence, and I couldn't help thinking that deep down all mothers carry the same fear, that we raised someone who'll one day forget us, or, worse, use us. Karen said it with acid humor, but I felt the stab raw. At least your son's nearby, she added suddenly. Yes, I answered, and that single word weighed like a stone. I have him nearby. After she left, I opened the window to clear out the smoke and watched the street. The city seemed on pause, like it was waiting for something. Deep down, so was I. I wanted a sign that everything was under control, that my plan hadn't fallen apart the minute it began. The sign came late at night, in the form of a phone call. It was Miller again, but his tone had changed. We've got movement, he said bluntly. The money left the main account 20 minutes ago. Where to? To a sub-account in Gibraltar. But something's off. There are simultaneous small transfers going to several secondary accounts. They're chopping the money up. And that's bad? That means they want to hide it quickly. We're going to try to block it, but we need time. I felt a cold wave run through my body. I pictured Michael and Sophie celebrating with a drink, unaware that the police were breathing down their necks, and my stomach turned. Is there anything I can do? I asked. No. It's our turn now. Trust us. He hung up, but I couldn't stay still anymore. I paced the house like a caged animal, replaying every detail, every phrase, every gesture from the last few days, looking for a clue to how far the deceit went. At dawn, I dozed off in an armchair. I woke up to my phone vibrating on the table. A message from Miller. Partial block achieved. We've stopped part of the transfer, but some money left the system. This is bigger than we thought. I looked at the screen, unsure if that was a win or a warning. Outside, the rain had started fine, steady, seeping through cracks. I stayed there, motionless, with the feeling that somewhere, something had broken for good, and that crack was soon going to swallow everything. The rain didn't stop all day, and the sound of drops on the windows mixed with Miller's voice in my head, repeating that phrase I couldn't shake. This is bigger than we thought. I'd barely slept an hour, but I couldn't rest. I made coffee, turned on the radio just to hear something other than my own thoughts, and kept staring at the phone, waiting for it to ring. It didn't take long. We need to talk, he said straight away. We know where the transfers ended up. Several accounts lead to shell companies, and they all point to the same name, Sophie Dawson. But she's not the one managing them. There's someone else, a guy who shows up in all the records and erases himself afterwards. A boss? I asked. Something like that. An Ernest. Moore, alias Nate. But we don't know if that's his real name. We're tracking him. I stayed silent for a few seconds. It wasn't a complete surprise, but hearing someone else was behind, Sophie made my stomach churn. And Michael? I finally asked. We've got no evidence he's moving the money. But his signature is on some crossed loan documents. He doesn't know what he's signing. I stared at the coffee steam. He doesn't know what he's signing. I'd heard that so many times at the bank, but I never imagined hearing it about my own son. Miller, I said, I want to talk to her. To Sophie? Yes. That's not a good idea, Mary Ellen. There are no good ideas left, just bad decisions planned a bit better. I hung up before he could answer. A couple of hours later, she was in front of me, in the same parking lot where we'd met the first time. This time she wasn't wearing makeup. Her hair was tied back, and her eyes were puffy, like she hadn't slept in days. As soon as she saw me, she broke down crying. What did you do, Sophie? I said firmly, without moving closer. I didn't want this, I swear, she sobbed. I didn't know they were going to use the money to clean other accounts. I just followed orders. I thought it was part of the business. You're not that naive. No, I'm not, she admitted with anger. But I'm not powerful enough to get out either. If I move, they sink me. She covered her face with her hands, and for a moment, I felt something like pity. I saw in her a younger version of myself, someone who thought swimming with sharks would make her stronger and ended up learning the water always belongs to someone else. Who is he? I asked. This Ernesto. He's the one who put us all here. He funded the company, pays for the ads, decides who gets paid and who disappears. And Michael? Michael thinks he admires him. He thinks he's his mentor. He doesn't know they're using him to plug holes, to put his name where no one else wants to sign. A long, heavy silence followed. The overhead lights flickered. She lit a cigarette with trembling hands and looked at me like she was hoping for an absolution I had no intention of giving. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. "Nothing. Don't do anything else. Stay out of it. You don't get who you're up against." That's when I knew it was too late for warnings. The game already had me inside, and the only way out was to keep going. When I got home, I found Michael waiting at the entrance. It was still raining, and his jacket was soaked. He looked like a lost boy. "Mom, we need to talk," he said. "Yes, I can imagine." We went up in silence. Once inside, he closed the door and stayed standing there, not knowing where to start. "Sophie says you went to the police. Is that true?" "It is." "Why did you do that?" he asked, his voice breaking. "You have no idea how much you've complicated things for me." "No, son. What I don't understand is how you got yourself into this." He started pacing the room, nerves betraying him. "I just wanted to fix things. I lost money, yes, but I was going to get it back. Then Ernesto offered me a way out." "Ernesto?" "Yes, an investor. He's got contacts, important people." "And you thought important people do business with desperate guys?" I said, still calm. "He used you, Michael, the same way he used Sophie, and you handed him your name and almost the keys to my account." He stopped, and for a second he seemed to understand. His eyes filled up, but he didn't cry. "I didn't want you to find out like this," he said. "I just needed a little time. Time is the most expensive thing a liar pays for." We stayed quiet, listening to the rain hammer against the windows. I saw him shaking. It wasn't just fear, it was shame. "What are you going to do now?" he asked, in barely a whisper. "I'm going to finish what I started, and you're going to stay put. And if they come for me, then it'll be your chance to tell the truth." Michael nodded, defeated. For a second I wanted to hug him, but I held back. It wasn't the time to be a mother, it was the time to be a witness. When he left, I called Miller and told him everything. He listened quietly. "We need to protect her," he said at last. "If Sophie's telling the truth, she could be the key to getting this man. But she has to cooperate officially." "I don't know if she will," I said. "She's scared." "Then make her trust you." I hung up and stared at the phone. It was still raining, and in the window's reflection I saw my own face, harder, older, but clearer too. I'd spent my whole life protecting what I had, afraid of losing it, and now that I'd almost lost everything, I finally understood fear is useless once. You've been pushed into the void. That night, for the first time in a long time, I didn't have dreams, just the sound of water falling non-stop, like the sky trying to clean something no one else dared touch. 3 days went by with no news, and the silence was a noise I couldn't breathe through. I lived glued to the phone, my emails, the doorbell. Every shadow by the window felt like a warning. Every step in the hallway like an announcement of something about to break. Miller had asked me for patience, but patience is a luxury you lose when you feel your son is walking through a minefield. I couldn't wait anymore. I decided to go find Michael. I knew he wasn't living with Sophie anymore. She'd slipped away in secret, Miller had told me, probably hiding for a while. I found him in his flat, blinds down, kitchen a disaster. The air smelled of loneliness and stale beer. He had a grown-out beard, a lost look, and when he opened the door, he looked at me like he didn't know whether to hug me or ask for forgiveness. I did neither. "I had to see you," I said. "You shouldn't be here. I shouldn't have signed anything either, but you see, we all do things we shouldn't." I walked in without asking and sat opposite him. I didn't need to fake my calm. I had it. That calm that comes when you stop running. "Michael, listen carefully. I know everything that's going on. I know about Ernesto, about the accounts, the transfers." "Mom, you don't know anything," he said, voice shaking. "It's more complicated than it looks." "No, son. What's complicated is keeping up a lie when no one believes you anymore." He clenched his fists, stood up, started pacing like a trapped animal. "I didn't want it to be like this," he said, voice breaking. "I thought I could fix it, pay off my debts and start over. At whose expense, Michael? Your mother's?" He looked at me and finally stopped pretending. In his eyes there was fear, shame, and something even harder to bear, a twisted kind of love. That guy gave me a chance, said he could help me recover what I lost. He only wanted my name, my signature. And when I wanted out, I couldn't. There's always a way out. Not for me. If I talk, they'll kill me. The silence between us dropped like a slab. I looked at him and realized that, for the first time, he was telling the truth. Not all of it, but enough. I stood up slowly and put a hand on his shoulder. "Tomorrow you're going to the station." "I can't." "Yes, you can. You're going to tell Miller everything." "And what are you going to do?" "If you don't go, I will." The sentence hung in the air, and it was like the world stopped for a second. Michael collapsed into the armchair, defeated. "And if I don't get out of this?" he asked. "Then at least you'll get out with your dignity, and that's worth more than you think." I left without looking back. In the hallway, I took a deep breath, my heart racing. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the sky was still gray, loaded, like it hadn't decided yet whether to drop another storm. I called Miller. I told him everything. He said they were preparing the operation to catch Ernesto. They needed Michael's cooperation, his testimony to confirm the transfers and the names. "Is he in any state to do that?" he asked. "I don't know," I said. "But if he isn't, I'll push him until he is." That night, when I got home, I found George sitting on the landing, waiting with his cane and a bag of warm bread. "I came by because you're not answering the phone," he said. "I'm fine, George." "No, you're not. But you fake it better than anyone." He came in with me, sat in the kitchen, and told me his tests had come back okay, that the pain was less serious than he'd feared. We laughed a bit, but we both knew it was borrowed laughter. Before leaving, he took my hand. "Be careful. Sometimes the truth doesn't set you free. It leaves you alone." "I know," I said, "but at least it leaves you alive." The next day, Michael kept his word. He called Miller and went to the station. They questioned him for hours. I waited in the car outside, watching the revolving door over and over, imagining every person walking out might be him. When he finally appeared, he walked slowly, pale but somehow more upright. He got in the car without speaking. "Well?" I asked. "They're going after Ernesto." "And you?" "I'm at their disposal." I didn't know if I felt relief or fear. I just nodded and drove back in silence. That same afternoon, Miller called. "We're doing the raid tonight. We've got the guy's location. I can't give you details, but I promise you this ends today." "And Michael?" "He'll be protected. He helped more than we expected." I hung up and stared at the phone, wanting to believe him. The hours crawled by. The clock hit 10, then 11, then midnight. I couldn't sleep. I paced the house, opened the window, and listened to the distant sirens. I didn't know if they were theirs, but something inside me tightened. An hour later, the phone rang. It was Miller. "We've got him," he said, firm. "We have Ernest Moore in custody, Sophie too." "And Michael?" "He's fine. He cooperated more than we expected." I dropped into the chair. I didn't cry, didn't shout. I just closed my eyes. It was a different calm, not of victory, but of exhaustion. The next morning, Michael came to see me. He had an order to appear in court, but also a look of peace I hadn't seen in years. He sat opposite me, hands clasped. "I guess you know everything," he said. "More than I wanted to." "I failed you." "Yes. But you're not the only one. We all fail at some point." There was a long silence. "I don't know how to fix this, Mom." "You can't. But you can. Start over, if you've got the courage." We stayed there, not talking, while the light came through the window and dust floated in the air. For the first time, I saw the child he'd been, and I felt an immense tiredness, but something like relief too. The storm had passed, but what was left to clean wouldn't disappear so easily. That night, when I turned off the lights, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. Just a deep stillness, the kind you feel when you've survived a shipwreck and can still hear the sea from the shore. The next day's dawn was quiet, different. Not the tense silence of the previous weeks, but a softer one, the kind that sounds like rest. I made coffee without rushing, opened the kitchen window and let the cold air in, carrying away the stale smell of fear. Outside, the neighborhood went back to its routine as if nothing had happened. Kids walked to school, neighbors chatted on the corner, and I stood there, looking at the street, trying to convince myself I could also go back to normal, even if I wasn't sure what that was anymore. The phone rang just before noon. It was Miller. His voice sounded less stiff, more human. "The operation's over," he said. "Ernest accepted a deal. He's going to pull on the whole chain, and your son is off the most serious charges. He cooperated fully. So he's not going to prison? He'll have to pay a fine, maybe do community service, but no jail. You helped him more than you think." "I wasn't trying to help him, Miller," I said. "I was trying to help myself." He didn't answer. He just thanked me and promised to keep me updated on the trial. When I hung up, I realized I'd forgotten to ask about Sophie. In a way, it no longer mattered. She'd been another piece on the board, as much a victim as a culprit. In those webs, we all are, a little bit. In the afternoon, George came by leaning on his cane with a packet of biscuits under his arm. His health was better, and so was his mood. He sat opposite me and stared for a while without speaking. "You've got a different face, Mary Ellen," he said at last. "Looser. Must be the war hangover. And Michael? At home. Says he's going to sell his car, pay what he owes, and start from scratch. And do you believe him?" "Not completely. But I want to. That's different." George smiled, opened the biscuits, and we ate in silence. Then he told me he'd decided to go back to his hometown for a few months to rest. I promised to visit once everything was over. He hugged me before leaving and said something that stuck with me. "Not all happy endings are fair, but the fair ones are sometimes enough to live in peace." That evening, Michael came over. He wore a clean shirt, was freshly shaved, with an air I didn't remember seeing in him for years. He brought no gifts, no excuses, no flowers, just a folder under his arm. "I came to give you this," he said. "It's the loan documents. They're worthless now, but I thought you'd want them." I took them and put them in the blue binder. Neither of us spoke for a while. He watched my hands for a bit and then said, "I don't know how to thank you for what you did." "Don't thank me. I still don't know if I did it for you or for me." "Then thank you for both." We sat together for a bit. He told me he'd talked to Sophie, that she was going to testify too. That she wanted to leave the country and start over somewhere else. I wished her luck, though deep down, I knew people like that don't truly change, they just change settings. When he left, I walked to the bedroom and opened the wardrobe. On the top shelf was the folder with my old bank documents, the cases I'd kept all those years. I took them out, one by one, and carefully tore them up, as if each page were a piece of guilt. I kept only one, the loan. I folded it and put it at the back of a drawer. That night, I didn't feel like turning on the news or reading headlines. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window. The rain had come back, fine and steady, like the sky wanted to remind me nothing gets cleaned in one go. I watched the lights reflected on the wet asphalt and thought about everything that had happened. Fear, anger, disappointment, guilt. I didn't feel like a heroine, just like a woman who'd survived her own son without losing love completely. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. It was Karen, in her floral robe, holding a container of hot stew. "I'm coming to have dinner with you. It's about time we talked about something else," she said. We sat in the kitchen, toasted with wine, and talked about anything but money. At the end, she looked at me with one of those smiles that don't need explaining. "You did it, Mary Ellen." "What?" "Staying alive without turning to stone." When she left, the house went quiet again. I put the dishes away, turned off the blown lights, and stood in front of the table, looking at the marks left by the glasses. I thought about Michael, about what was ahead, about how long it takes a wound to stop bleeding. I took a blank sheet of paper, laid it on the table, and wrote my will. Not out of fear, but out of clarity. I left precise instructions for everything except the money. In that space, I wrote just one line. I don't leave any money to my son, Michael. I leave him something more expensive, the chance to start without my purse in the way. I put the paper in the blue binder, closed the drawer, and turned off the lamp. Before going to bed, I looked at myself in the mirror and saw something I hadn't seen in a long time: serenity. Not happiness, not relief, a rough, honest peace, the kind that comes after almost losing everything and still being able to say to yourself, I stayed standing. And as I turned out the last light, I thought that a child can break your heart, yes, but money only reminds you how much it cost you to raise them. Then the silence wrapped around me completely, and for the first time in months, I slept without dreams. And that's my story. I don't know if I did the right thing, or if I just followed the instinct of a mother who got tired of staying quiet, but at least I told it. If you made it this far, thank you for listening, truly. Now, I'd love to know what you would have done in my place. Would you have protected your son or let him fall? Tell me in the comments. I want to read you. And if this story stirred anything in you, anger, sadness, or simple curiosity, subscribe. I've got many more truths disguised as anecdotes to tell.